this exercise, we're going to create the Miss AUST Pageant logo animation. I'm going to start in my front view. I'll go to Shapes and choose Text. And the reason I create my text in the top view is that I want it to be standing upright instead of lying on the ground. So I'll click to create my text. I'll go to Modify and I'll type for the first word, Miss. Now what I want to do is bevel this so that it has chamfered edges instead of having straight cuts like the ones I would have with the extrude modifier. So I'm going to go to modifier list and choose bevel instead of extrude. I'll change the color now so that it's a bit more visible, because later on I'm going to be assigning materials. And I'm going to set my first level height to 1. The outline is 1, which would give me this slanted cut in the back. I'll choose level 2 on, and I'll set the height, say, to 6. I'll click on level 3. I have to choose the same height as level 1, but I have to make it go inwards instead of going outwards. So instead of having 1 for the outline, I'm going to choose -1, and that would be the result that I get. Now at any time I can go back to text and change the font. Once I'm happy with that, I'll go to move, press shift and create a copy down. I need to make it a copy and not an instance because I'm going to be changing the text down here. I'll go back to text and choose AUST. I'm going to increase the size for this one here. And again, I'll press shift and go down. And this time I'll type pageant. I'll choose a different font for this one, and I'll reduce the size. At any time I can press F3 to see my objects in solid mode. And the last thing I want to have is 2007 up here. So I'll press shift and go up, and under text I'll type 2007. Again, I might change the font into something that suits my type of animation. So once I have this, I need to save the file so that I can continue my work. So here I'm gonna call this Miss AUST. And what I will do now is animate my text so that that would be the final positioning alignment for my objects, but at the beginning they're gonna start from outside and eventually finish with this position. The first thing I'll do before I animate though is create a camera. So I'm gonna go to my left view and I'm gonna choose cameras and target camera. I'm gonna press S to snap and create a camera. The reason I snapped is because I want to have a perfect horizontal line between the camera and the target. But after I create that, I can remove the snap so that I can easily change the position of the camera. So here in my perspective view, I'll press C to show me what the camera is seeing. If I click from the top view or any other view on the line between the camera and the target, I can select both and therefore move both at the same time. So here I'm adjusting the position of the camera and the target so that I have a good last position for everything, because I repeat that all the objects are going to fly through and then come and settle at this position here. I also want to create 2 circles that run around the text that I have. For that, I'm going to go to Shapes and I'm going to choose Donut, and I'm going to start the donut from the center here and finish there. If I go to Modify and apply a bevel modifier, the same settings that I had for the text will apply here. If I press P now to get out of the camera and go back to my perspective view, I can see the beveling on the donut. Now here I see that I have a lot of segmentation, which I need to remove to make this to have a better smoothness for my circle. To remove the segmentation, I'm gonna go back to donut, and under interpolation I'm gonna choose adaptive, which will have more vertices in my line, which is the donut here, and therefore give me a better effect. So when I go back to bevel, that would be what I get. Alright, so again, press C to go back to the camera view. Do some final adjustment to the positioning of everything. And that's it. So, to create the animation, I'm gonna first of all set my timing to 10 seconds of animation at a frame rate of 30 frames per second, which is the default frame rate in Max. We need 300 frames to get 10 seconds because 1 second is 30 frames and therefore 10 seconds are 300 frames. So I'm gonna click on time configuration down here and I'm gonna set the end time to 300. If I ever set my frame rate to PAL, I would have to enter 250 for my frame rate. So once this is done, I'm gonna press auto key and I need everything to settle down by frame, say 220. So I'm gonna select all of these objects and I'm gonna set a key by 220 because at 220 they're gonna have this position and orientation. Now at frame 0, I'm gonna take each object and move it away, each one in a different direction and a different orientation. So at the beginning I can't see anything from the camera view, and eventually if I scrub the time now, they're gonna gather around and finish gathering at frame 220. Now here, before I animate, I'm gonna set my interpolation for the keyframes to smooth, which means that I'm gonna have a smooth curve for the animation that I'm gonna create. You should do this before you set the animation. So what I'll do in my case to reset is actually remove my animation from the objects and recreate the keyframes so that the interpolation is set to smooth. If you do that before you create your animation, you won't have anything to repeat. So I'm going to set a keyframe here and just go and redo the same thing. So now when I scrub, I'm going to get approximately the same effect. Now what I need to do is change the orientation of these objects at frame 0. So with AUST, I'll just go like this, just give it any random orientation, and the same goes for every piece of text. And I'm also going to do that to my beveled donut. So all of these now have rotation keyframes at 0, and because I chose set key, they also have the proper orientation at frame 220, which means that now they're gonna animate into the final orientation. So if I press play and observe this from the camera view, this is what I get. Now of course the animation here is proving to be too slow. I'll fix that in a second. I'm gonna start my animation with miss. I'm gonna need the miss text to be the fastest. So it's gonna arrive the fastest to its final position. The final position is frame 220, so if I press shift and copy this, say to frame 60 and scrub the time, it's gonna just take 60 frames to reach its final position. And since I have my interpolation set to curve or smooth down here, these two keyframes, although they are the same, but the interpolation between them is a curve, and therefore it's gonna have this effect instead of just sitting static at frame 60, which will give me more life in my animation. Alright, now for AUST, I'm gonna grab frame 220 and I'm gonna make it settle down at frame 100. So again, if I scrub, it's gonna take that position and then overshoot and then go back to it because of the curve interpolation. Okay, now pageant will come latest, so I'm gonna make it come, say, at frame 140. So select frame 220, press shift and go to 140. And then 2007 needs to reach the proper place at 220, but it's gonna rotate from 220 to 260. So at frame 260, I'm gonna give it a rotation. So it's gonna come here and rotate and then settle. But at 260, it should have the proper orientation. So this should be 0, so that it's totally facing the camera. Alright, now for this, I'm gonna again give it the same keyframe as 220 at frame 160. Or maybe here just give it another rotation so that it continues to rotate until it reaches the final keyframe. Now I'm gonna uncheck auto key and I'm gonna make a copy of this. So I'm gonna press Ctrl V and choose copy. I'll go to donut and change the radius of the copy so that I have another one that's thinner. And I'm gonna just offset the timing for this new one so that it settles a bit later than the first one. So here I have the two keyframes for the copy, the thinner copy. Instead of finishing at 220, I'm gonna shift these two keyframes, say by 20 frames, and that would make it the new one, that would make it finish a bit later, which is frame 240, which is at the same time that the 2007 text is finished rotating. So if I scrub now or play the animation now, that would be the result that I get. Now of course I can play with the timing so that everything gets a bit faster or a bit slower. Remember that to speed up an animation, you decrease the time between the keyframes. So if I grab AUST, it starts at frame 0. If I make the start happen at frame 60 and I press play, AUST is gonna come faster. It's gonna overshoot a little bit, but then come back. And the same goes for any other object that I offset the time. Alright, I like to make this continue rotating for a while. So at frame 260 with auto key on, I'll just continue the rotation. And if I want it to slow down at the end, I have to fix the curve of animation. So if I right click and choose curve editor and I grab my rotation curves, this is the smooth curve that I got because of the smooth interpolation. But if I selected this keyframe and chose to have the auto tangents, I can now change the interpolation, which is having the animation slow down instead of just cutting abruptly. Alright, and I'm going to do this for X, Y, and Z in the rotation of that object. So the important thing here is to have the curve easing out into the final orientation. This is very important for getting a slowed down animation at the end. And at any time I need to check to see whether my curve is nice and smooth all over. So I just did this for the last one, but of course I can do it for whichever object I like here. So if I play the animation now, the timing is much better and I have a much better smoothing out for the animation of that last object. Alright, so what I need to do now is create the materials. I'm gonna select all my objects here and give them one material. So I'm gonna press M, and I'm gonna call this material my gold material. And I'm gonna assign. Under shader basic parameters, I'm gonna choose metal, and for the diffuse color, I'm gonna choose a golden color, which is something like this. I'm gonna go down to maps, and under reflection, I'll choose none, bitmap, and I'm gonna select a map to reflect. I'm gonna go to reflection and select lakerem2.jpg. If you don't have this map, just open any image in Photoshop that has some contrast to it and play with the colors so that they're a bit golden. And I'm gonna go to parent now. I'm gonna look here and play with the specular level and the glossiness so that I have a nice metallic look here. So basically I need to have something like this. So if we render a frame, we're gonna see that we have a nice metallic material. Alright, so once this is done, I need to render the animation. So I'm gonna go to rendering, render, or click on this button here, it's the same thing, or press F10 on the keyboard. I need to render an animation, so I'm gonna go to time output and choose active time segment, so that would render the whole 301 frames that I have. If I was previewing this, I would render at 320 times 240, but for a final rendering, I would choose 640 times 480. On the render output, I'll choose files and select AVI or QuickTime in case you had QuickTime installed on your machine. And I would call this, for example, Miss AUST. Make sure that it's either AVI or QuickTime and nothing else. I'm gonna choose save. I'll press OK for the compression settings, and I will render. If you look down here, it's gonna give you the time it's gonna take to finish the rendering. So far I have nothing in my image, so the rendering was a bit fast. Once you start to have objects, it's gonna take a bit longer to render, but it still gives you the remaining time. So on my machine here, it's gonna take under 1 minute to finish the rendering. And up here, it's gonna give you the name of the rendered AVI or QuickTime movie. So it should say Miss AUST or whichever name you chose .avi. At any time, you can press cancel and see the result of the animation that you just rendered. Once the animation is rendered, I'm gonna go to File and choose View Image File to see the rendered animation. If you rendered to the desktop, for example, you can just minimize max and double click on the rendered AVI. So there it is. I would choose now File, View Image File, and either browse to the location or just open in the current folder depending on where you saved your animation. And now when you play, you're gonna see the final rendered animation. So now this animation can be viewed on any machine without needing to have Max installed on that machine.